Hello, today we're going to be talking about classifications and measures of strengths and positive outcomes. We learned from our text that back in the mid part of the 20th century, Carl Menninger, a psychiatrist and one of the two brothers who started the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, advocated for a kind of a classification system that focused more on what is right with people rather than what is wrong with people. It has taken a while now for psychology to evolve to where there is a high level of interest in doing just that. And our chapter explores different ways in which researchers have gone about developing instruments to measure strengths. Let's take a look at how the term strength is defined. As you'll find in our text, Lindley and Harrington define strength as a capacity for feeling, thinking, and behaving in a way that allows optimal functioning in the pursuit of valued outcomes. Traditionally, classification systems have focused on what is wrong with us. And there are two that are currently in use, that are widely used. One is the ICD-10, the International Classification of Diseases developed by the World Health Organization, and the other is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM. We're now in the 5th edition of that, so DSM-5, published by the American Psychiatric Association. The DSM-5 is used throughout America as the leading instrument for diagnosing psychological disorders. If you become a mental health professional, chances are you will be using the DSM-5 in your work with clients. Even if you may not enthusiastically embrace a medical model of diagnosis, the DSM-5 is widely used and is oftentimes necessary for billing insurance companies for reimbursement for counseling or therapy, and serves as a sort of a shorthand way of communicating among professionals who might be working with clients. But it does focus on psychological disorders. If you have taken our course in applied psychopathology, or if you've taken abnormal psychology elsewhere, you have learned probably about DSM-5 and many of the psychological disorders that are included in it. It actually has over 500 disorders. So towards the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century, various researchers have been working on developing systems for measuring and categorizing strengths. There are 3 of these that are discussed in our textbook: the Clifton Strengths Finder, the VIA Inventory of Strengths, VIA standing for Values in Action, and the Search Institute Profiles of Student Life, Attitudes, and Behaviors. Today, we're going to be talking about 2 of these, the Clifton Strengths Finder and the VIA Inventory of Strengths. You're probably aware by now that you will be completing the VIA Inventory of Strengths as one of your positive psychology exercise assignments. In fact, you may have already completed it. the time you watch this video. So we'll be exploring that one in just a little bit. Let's start with the Clifton Strengths Finder. Donald Clifton, who was an industrial organizational psychologist, I believe, at the University of Nebraska, now deceased. He was interested in developing an instrument that could be used to study what was right with people. In fact, that was his big question. What would happen if we studied what was right with people? So he developed an instrument that identified around 36 what he called talents. And he defined a talent as something that is a naturally recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior that can be productively applied. Not only did he develop his Strengths Finder, but he also developed a way of going into an organization, a business, also a school, and administering the Clifton Strengths Finder to the people who are a part of that organization and helping them to better understand their talents and how they can embrace, integrate their talents, and use them in their daily life to enhance their well-being. So when you read about the Clifton Strengths Finder in your text, hopefully you'll come to appreciate some of the ways in which it has been applied. And later on in our time together during this course, we'll be looking at the Clifton Strengths Finder again when we discuss the chapter that looks at the application of positive psychology in educational and work settings. So there are about 36 different talents that comprise the Clifton Strengths Finder, as I said earlier. And in your text, you'll be able to actually look over all 36 of those talents. And a sample of the report is given on one of our authors who completed the Clifton Strengths Finder. I completed it once myself in the context of reading a book published on the Clifton Strengths Finder. The thing about the Clifton Strengths Finder is that you do have to pay to take it, usually by buying one of their books, and then they give you a code that you can use to go online and take this Clifton Strengths Finder. When you look over the different talents that comprise the Clifton Strengths Finder, my favorite one is the last one that's listed in your book, called WOO, W-O-O. I would just like to be able to say that I was high in WOO, although that was not one of my highest talents. And WOO stands for winning others over, if you're interested in knowing that. So take a look at that list of talents in the Clifton Strengths Finder and see what you think about it. So you are going to learn about yourself in terms of measured strengths. When you take the VIA survey, the Values in Action survey. Now, the way in which this survey came about is really fascinating to me because Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson went about studying writings from all over the world that had been published over a 3,000-year period in an effort to identify human virtues that they believed to be universal. Remember, we have already talked about virtues some, from both an Eastern and Western perspective. So Peterson and Seligman looked at many different religious writings, not only Christian, but other religions. They looked at popular writings. historic as well as more contemporary writings. And based on this research, they came up with a list of 6 virtues that they consider to be universal. These 6 virtues are listed and described in your text, but I'm just going to briefly go over them with you. These 6 virtues include wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. I think the names of these virtues are fairly self-explanatory, but I did want to just comment on temperance and transcendence. As you may be aware, temperance has to do with having self-control. And transcendence has to do with our connection with something greater than ourselves. Often it's God, or perhaps a sense of being connected with all of humanity. Well, to better operationalize these virtues, that is, figure out ways of measuring and describing them, Seligman and Peterson identified strengths associated with each virtue. And there are a total of 24 strengths that they came up with associated with these 6 virtues. And they developed an instrument that can be used to actually measure these 24 strengths. And that is the Values in Action survey, the one that you will be taking online. When you take the Values in Action survey, it is free. It will generate a report for you. I hope you will save that report and that you'll share the results in your journal reflection and also your reaction to the results as well. Hopefully share some of that with fellow classmates in the reflections discussion board. If you recall, when we were talking about the Athenian view of human nature, that is, in old Athens, and we were discussing Aristotle, one of the things we commented on was how Aristotle believed that the pathway to joy is to live out our virtues in our daily lives. So an important assignment you will be completing throughout our time together is to pick one of your leading strengths in the VIA survey. These are called character strengths. To pick one of those strengths and to look at ways in which you can further develop it and express it in your daily lives, and to write about your experience of doing this. You're going to be asked to do this every week and to include that in your journal reflections. And the basis for my asking you to do that is Aristotle's belief that when we are more intentional about expressing our virtues in our daily living, it is a pathway to joy. When you complete the VIA survey, some of the results may surprise you. You might think to yourself, well, I thought I was higher in that strength than the survey says. But please keep in mind that this survey just gives you a relative ranking of the different strengths as measured by the survey. It's not saying that you are low in something because it's lower than something else. It's just saying that it's rated or ranked lower than some other strengths based on how you answer the questions. And if you want to pick some of the strengths that are lower on your list and work with them during our time together, you can certainly do that as well. Another topic I would like to discuss with you today, a related topic, has to do with a discussion of what the authors of our text call dimensions of well-being. They identify 3 different dimensions of well-being: subjective or emotional well-being, psychological well-being, and social well-being. Let's talk about each one of these just a little bit here, starting with subjective well-being, also referred to as emotional well-being. And some people use the word happiness to discuss the same dimension of well-being. So emotional well-being has a lot to do with how each of us views our level of happiness and satisfaction with life, along with having a balance of positive and negative affect or emotion in our lives. So it really is a threefold structure of life satisfaction, positive affect, and the absence of negative affect. And each of us can think about these 3 dimensions of well-being: emotional, psychological, and social, and consider where we are with respect to each one of these dimensions. Psychological well-being actually has 6 components associated with it: self-acceptance, personal growth, purpose in life, environmental mastery, autonomy, and positive relations with others. There is a very helpful table in your text in this chapter that I would encourage you to read and think about, in which each of these dimensions is described in some detail, and these individual terms associated with each kind of well-being are defined and examples are provided. The third type of well-being is called social well-being, and it is comprised of coherence, integration, actualization, contribution, and acceptance. When you read your text on social well-being and study the table, all of the components of social well-being are described fairly well, except for social coherence. So I wanted to say a little bit about social coherence. As I understand it, social coherence is a state in which groups of people, families, friends, even larger organizations, interact and cooperate with one another at high levels. So you might think about, if you are a part of such a group that has the advantage of being able to interact and cooperate with one another at a high level. This is what I believe the authors mean by social coherence. And finally, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about the difference between flourishing and languishing. Historically, whenever someone sought counseling or therapy, the goal of the treatment tended to be to just help the person get over their symptoms or improve their symptoms. And once that happened, then therapy was concluded. But with the advent of positive psychology, increasingly, findings from positive psychology research are being applied to counseling and therapy. And later on in our time together, we'll be exploring this more in depth. But I just wanted to mention that one of the hopeful outcomes of counseling and therapy would be not just to help a person get over their problems, but to get beyond that level of functioning to a better place. Not just the absence of symptoms, but the presence of well-being in their lives. When someone is helped to get over their symptoms, in the positive psychology literature, that's sometimes referred to as getting the person back to zero. Zero is the absence of symptoms, but it also does not involve the presence of psychological well-being. When we get above zero, if you will, then we're in the area where the individual is able to experience well-being, psychological, social, and emotional well-being. So a researcher named Keyes talks about the difference between flourishing and what he calls languishing. And individuals with high levels of emotional, psychological, and social well-being are described as flourishing, while individuals who have no mental illness but do have low levels of well-being are described as languishing. So I'd like to ask you to think about yourself in relation to flourishing and languishing, and where you see yourself at this time. Well, that's all for now. I look forward to talking with you again soon.